Ahmed Aleph. So the Gemara, very interesting. 3 lines at the top of the page. And I saw somewhere an explanation of this particular point. I can't remember what the explanation is. It goes as follows. Rami Reish Lakish Alma Oyer. Lakish was lying on the floor on his stomach. Bei Midrasha, in the base of Medrash, in front of all the Talmidim, he was lying on the ground. Umakshi. And he's asking the most difficult questions. There must be a reason why the Gemara is telling us this, even if it happened. So there's some connection, but I can't remember what it was. He asked a very simple question. So what does the Mishnah say? You shechted an animal shaloi lishma, right? You didn't do lishma. The animal, you still bring it up properly, but nobody was yotze with that animal, and the owner of the animal has to bring another one. So he said, I don't understand. If you tell me the animal is still a kosher animal, then you're out to. Why shouldn't it be yotze for the balabas? Navas, you'll tell me that it's not a good carbon. So why bother bringing it? What's going on here? Rabbi Elazar said to him, Rabbi Yechon's main Talmud, Motzinu, what do you mean? So, in other words, your problem is, where do you find a carbon with if it's not effective? Well, a person dies, the carbon is no longer effective. And yet I'll show you that if the person dies, we still bring that carbon. A carbon chatas, once the owner dies, we don't bring anymore because of halacha Moshe Messinai. But let's say a carbon oila. If a person dies. Right? And Rashi said but even not to that, halacha Moshe Messinai, that you don't bring it up anymore. Fine. But an oila, for example, if the owner has a chayv an oila and he dies, you still bring the oila. I know, but the person doesn't need the oil anymore. There's no bailim anymore. So this question that you have, Reish Lakish has this question, the principle that if the carbon is not effective, why bring it? We find in other cases. For example, we find other examples where the animal is brought up, even though it's not effective. We learned in a Mishnah, and we had this whole sugya in Shavuot the Raisa in Kedushin. A woman sheheviyah chatasa. If a woman had this chayva chatas and an oila, let's say she gave birth, chayva chatas and an oila, she brought her chatas and then mesa. So what's left outstanding? The oila. It's this of the I want to bring Shavuot the Raisa. That's why the children have to bring it. She would love that I said she set it aside already, and therefore they have to bring it. Yaviyu yoshin oilasa. The children bring the oila. Now the she's dead. She passed away. So what's the point of the oila? So we see clearly from here, even though it's not effective, you bring the oila. So what was Reish Lakish's question? If you shecht an animal shaloi lishma, and you still bring the animal up, but nobody's yotze, where do you find? He asked that. Where do you find the idea that you bring a carbon when it's not effective? So he's saying right here, Abelaz is saying, of course it's effective. See, but in this case of a Isha Yeledis, she set aside that she passes away, you still bring the oila, even though it's not effective. Umesa, lo yavi yosha chatasa. Chata they don't bring because they're not going to see it, but the oila they bring. Amalei said, Reish Lakish said, you misunderstood my question. Lying there on the ground, Reish Lakish, Gemara starts with an introduction, he's lying on his stomach. And this is what he does while he's lying on his stomach. He's having the shaila in front of the whole base of Medrash. You think I knew the Mishnah? Of course I'm moided by all kabbanas there that we still bring the carbon even though it's not effective. My question is Osham. An Osham is a kapara. It's different than other kabbanas. It's a kapara. But if there's no one to be mechaper, in other words, Kisloi Lishma, why does the Mishnah say, the Chachamim say, bring it? Rabbi Elazar in the Mishnah says you don't bring it. He says the Osham is like a chatas, it's disqualified. But the Chachamim say you bring it. He's saying, what's the point? Where do you find the precedence? And don't bring a knife from this woman, that's an oila. But you look about oila the asi lachamisa. I'm moide. Osham. My question is Osham. The loy asi lachamisa. Minolon. How do you know? Amalei, Rabbi Elazar said back to him, Harei machle kuscha b'tzidov. Rabbi Elazar agreed with you. Rabbi Elazar, why do you think Rabbi Elazar disqualifies an Osham? For this very point. What's the point if it's not a chaper? Rabbi Elazar, but afa Osham, Osham like a chatas. Amar said, Shlok is lying there on the ground. Just picture this. He's lying around. He says, people there's a rumor out there that you, Rabbi Elazar, is a big man. Kaminani Mishnah Shlema. I'm talking like the Chachamim, the Stam Mishnah. But Rabbi Elazar, you tell me, be happy. Rabbi Elazar says the same word you say. I'm trying to understand the Chachamim. The Chachamim say you continue bringing the Asham. I want to know what's the point of bringing an Asham when it's not effective, and you bring the knife from Oila. I give up with you. I will answer my own question. What we learned the last few days. Moitzes starts off Moitzes for Secha Tishma, keep your word, the neder that you made. And then it says it becomes an adova. And we asked, how can a neder turn into an adova? So the pasuk teaches us that started out being a neder. Then if you did it loy lishma, at least bring it up as an adova. So there you see that it's you weren't yaitze, you're netted. So in other words, it wasn't effective, but you still bring it. That's the basis. And the pasuk is talking about Osham. That's what I'm saying. Exactly what I said before. Interesting. Sometimes usually the Gemara repeats the whole thing. Here the Gemara just decides to say chulus. Yossi Rab Zeda. So now the next generation are sitting and discussing this discussion between Rish Lakish and Rabbi Elazar. Why Rabbi Elazar couldn't give a better answer? Why Rish Lakish didn't give another answer, and so on. Yossi Rab Zeda, but Rabbi Yitzchak Barabba, Yossi Abai was there as well. The Yasri company, they were sitting there, so Kashtel Rish Lakish, what did Rish Lakish tell us? What was bothering him? Not oila. That we have an eye for the woman. Osham. His problem was Osham. It's a kapara.
Was only one generation after the Shlach.
Rabbi was Rabbi Zeda was in the time of Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Zeda. This is 2 generations later. So so they said, what was bothering the Shlakish? Only Osham, right? It's a kapara. What's the point? The La'aseh La'achamisa. Yeah, and not only that. Why in Osham? There's another point here. What happens to an Osham if there's no longer any Bailim? What do you normally do in Osham? The Bailim died. Not the case of Loy Lishma. On Osham, the Bailim died. What do you do with that? By Chatas, we say it dies. Yeah, 5 Chatoishim makes 11 working later. What happens to an Osham? You let it wander around till it contracts a mum, then you sell it, and with the money, you catch his bech, you do the dessert from his bech, and you fill it up with oils. So he says over here, but the Osham itself, you don't bring up after Misa. Right? So because the Osham bring up Misa, he's saying here, so why, if the person dies, you don't bring an Osham? But if it's loy lishmai, why? Because it's ineffective. And yet, if it's loy lishmai, we say, you know what, continue bringing up the carbon, even though no point. That was bothering the Shlakish, right? And Abelazar didn't answer. Then the Shlakish gave his own answer because in the pasuk, Meitzah Sechet Tishmar. I got a problem with that. What do you bring a knife from that pasuk? What's that pasuk talking about over there? It's talking about Meitzah Sechet Tishmar. Talking about a neder. Which kabbanas can you make a neder for? An oile, a shlami, a taida. You can't make a neder. I'll bring an Osham. If you didn't obey it, you bring an Osham, a mila, let's say, if you stole from the base of mila. If you didn't do it, you can't bring it. So obviously the pasuk is not talking about Osham. How can the Shlokish answer his own question from a pasuk that's not talking? His only thing that bothered him was Osham, and he brings a pasuk that's not talking about Osham. Can't be talking about Osham. So I'm going to ask a question. The Nosel Talmud, and where did he learn that from? Meitzah Secha. Ema haba bened in the davar laisu. Okay, all we know is from there that things which come from a neder bring it, even though it's not effective. But Osham, but an Osham, since you can, it's not part of neder and davar, maybe it's not going to bring it all. And it's a question, still a good question. What's the point of bringing it if it's ineffective and you can't use that pasuk for it? Amalu Abaya said, you're right. Reish Lakish Mahacha. You know where you learned? You misunderstood Reish Lakish. Abaya said, let's go a step deeper. He wasn't learning from Meitzah Secha that you bring the Osham. You thought that's what you're learning from there. You're asking, how do you see? No. He's learning from there that Meitzah Secha that you don't, that the Osham is ineffective. But how do you know you bring it? You know where you bring it from Chatas. The Torah says by Chatas, don't bring the Chatas, no, the 5 things. And there it says Chatas who? Why is it? Sorry, it says V'shachat oisol lechatas. Only by a Chatas that has this particular din. And not where? Something similar to a Chatas. By an Osham, we're not going to, what do you call it? Does not have the same din as a Chatas, that you don't bring it. So an Osham, how do you know you bring the Osham from the fact that only a Chatas you don't? So an Osham you do. But how do you know then it's ineffective? Maybe now you bring it, maybe tak it's effective as well, even though you did it Leilishma. How you know it's ineffective? You know that from the pasuk of Neder. The Neder turns into Dava, here the same thing. So that's what you're learning from there. So he says, no. You know where Rabbi learns from Mahocha Pasach. From here, the shochat oisel lechatas oisel lishmok sheda only by a chatas if it's lishma is kosher shalai lishma psula. What's in it by chatas if he didn't do the shochat oisel lechatas? If it's shetted for the sake of a chatas, and if he didn't, it's possible. Only by oisa, only by chatas. By osham, it's not possible. Bring the osham. So how do you know you bring the osham from shochat oisel lechatas? Hosha kosher lishmok shedin. So if it's kosher already, maybe it's even a good carbon. So the Meitzah Secha is coming to reduce, not to include. So it's not a problem. Freddy Gemara, no. My question still is asking Abaya. Maybe that from the passing Meitzah Secha, you know that all kabbanas that you can bring up as a neder, as an adava, you can bring up on your own. It is ineffective. You bring it still because you live from Shachar Chatzis, but it's ineffective. Since the pasuk is not talking about Osham because he cannot bring it as an adava, and we know from Chatzis that you bring the Osham, maybe it is effective. You're learning from Neder that it's not effective, but it's not talking about Osham. So maybe Osham not only you bring it, but It's mechapa the bailam as well, maybe. And that's it's the shlokish question is still what do you call it? So shlokish question, good question. Ema hababa neder double license. So it's question on shlokish. Hababa neder double license. It's a talk we learn from there that it turns from a neder to a dove. But Osham, actually, now it's the positive of Osham. Maybe Osham. Now we know for chatz you bring it, and you bring it maybe, and it's maratz as well. Amar Abaye, no, can't be. Can't be that an Osham is maratz. All other kabbanas are not. And Osham is. Why not? Osham do not learn mutzah. You can't say kavachayim in ma'ola. Umadach oila, which is not mechapi. You know, it's not even mechapas, right? It's shvachemaisis. And yet ain't a meratza because it's loyal shmoy. It cannot be meratza. Osham that you need more. Osham, it's much more than just bringing a carbon. It has to be for meratza you for atone you for your aveda. Shemachapa ain't a din if it's loyal shein meratza. If oila doesn't work. If it's Leila Shmai, surely an Asham doesn't work Leila Shmai. But you matter what's a surely? Maybe an Asham is stricter than an Oila. Maybe an Oila is stricter than an Asham, and that's why it doesn't work. What do you mean? What do you say Oila is stricter than an Asham? The whole thing has to be burnt in his beach. Say no, Shlamim istichu. Shlamim also, a Shlamim is ineffective. It doesn't have to be burnt in his beach. So we see that nothing to do with the Chumrah. Chumrah, Kal. If it's Leila Shmai, you bring it, but it's ineffective, and it doesn't have any effect whatsoever. And therefore, but Asha maybe it is maratz. Says the Gemara. Malo Shlam. What's that? You know why Shlamim maybe it's not effective. She came to Unin. It's a chumrah there. You need Nesachin. Now the Nesachin is not so much a chumrah because you have it by other. You even have it by Asha Mitzera, but you need Trufas Chazei V'Shaik, which you don't have in other places. So maybe that's why it's ineffective. But an Asham should be effective. Meitaka should be effective. And you can't learn from the passing ned and the dove. It's not talking about Asham. Each chumrah is not shared by the other one. So these chumras have no bearing on this din outcome. Each chumrah is different. What's the common denominator? They're all kachim. And the shachten shaloi lishman, you didn't do lishman. And the din is shading, you still bring it up. You learn that from chatas. And the eimeratzin. But it doesn't atone. So ani avi asham shukai yishaktu leishmai kosher abaveinim. So we include asham as well, and that's how we know taken not from the pasuk, but once we establish that, we learn from there. So Bai said that's what Pshat is looking. Said your mother 1 second. Even the tzad Shabbos has a chumrah. Malach Shabbos you can yeshne bit tzibur. They have a chumrah that what that they're shaykh even to a tzibur, and therefore because of such a chumrah thing, if you don't do it 100% right, it can't be an atzah. Mashaying an ashim, a tzibur never brings an ashim. Says the Gemara, you don't bring a tzibur a toida, and yet it's the same thing there. You bring it even though it's not an atzah. Oh, 1 second. Mala toida has his own chumrah. She came to unin lechem. He has a 40 chalas, and therefore maybe if you don't do it right, you don't raise an atzah. So Gemara says, they don't have the din of chalas, and yet if you didn't do it right, you bring the animal, but samaratza. Again, the chumras each one has is different than the other one. They don't share it. What's the common denominator? All kosher. If you didn't do it correctly, they're kosher, and yet they don't atone. So same by common asham. It's holy. Kosher. Says the Gemara, but all three have something in common. All three of them, you can voluntarily bring them up. So therefore, it has its dinim. But Asham, you cannot voluntarily bring up. And since Asham, you cannot voluntarily bring up, maybe if you bring it, it's Manatz as well. No, but Chatz is a puzzle. Chatz is not part of the equation. Chatz is if you didn't let the Shmoy, it is puzzle. On Asham, if you didn't let the Shmoy, the animal is kosher, but it's not Manatz. I'm asking, how do you know? How do you know? You can't Oilish Lamim and you can't learn from them. And you can't learn from that pasuk Moitzer Sechet Tishmar because they're talking about Neder and Adava, not Osham. Back to square one. And there's no Kavachemer, like we just showed. Ella Omar Rava says Rava Zois HaToyre. Go back to what we learned yesterday. We have pasuk Zois HaToyre LaOila. You bring and all the kabbanas are compared. So therefore, we could Hikishu HaKasav L'Shlamim. All the kabbanas are compared to each other. In that pasuk, it also mentions Asham, right? It says Zois HaToyre LaOila LaMincha LaChatas LaAsham. So therefore, we compare an Asham to a Zevachim Shlamim. So we compare it to a Zevachim Shlamim. That what? That is kosher, but it doesn't. You're not fulfilling your mitzvah. You still have to bring another carbon. The there are a number of kabbanas mentioned in that pasuk. How do you know to compare them to shlamim? Maybe compare them to chatas. where it's ineffective. My chaz is the akshes lamim akish lechatas. Compare it asham to a chatas. Now, if you compare an asham to chatas, what should it then be? Not only it doesn't atone, but you shouldn't even bring it up. It's possible because the chatas. What do you do with the chatas if you did like the Shema? He says on Mishnah, it's possible. So if you compare it to chatas, it's possible. But we can't do that. The moral answer about you can't do that. We just said before. It says in the pasuk that oisav also oisav lechatas. That only a chatas has his din that if he did not do it lishma. You have to make it l'shem chatas. If he did not, it's possible. And the oisah is limiting the chatas, so you cannot compare an asham to a chatas. So what are you going to compare it to? So compare it to a shlamim. It says the pasuk oisah, and therefore it's already memayit that v'shachat oisah lechatas, that only a chatas has to be l'shma, if not, it's possible. Mashenkin asham. That ends that discussion. Other Amoraim had discussions. It's amazing. So all these Amoraim are discussing a conversation between Shlokish and Rabbi Lazar.
Well, what's the shot that he was lying on the floor?
I remember seeing not only the shot. Sorry.
That's the question why we didn't practice.
No, that's on the bat.
But you start question on that because
but he's on the stomach. But first of all, what's relevant? And first of all, why is he doing it? What's relevant? I remember seeing somewhere. This is the last machzor or 2 machzor ago. That the fact that he's lying on the stomach is connected to the question that he asked. You know, one of these papers pulled. I can't remember what it was. It was very cute. And if I remember, it'll come back to me. Another conversation. Yosef Rab Huna, Rab Nachman, Yosef Rab Sheish Gabayim. And Rab Sheish was sitting there. And they were Yossi Kamri. So they're also repeating the whole sugya. Kashil Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish was bothered Asham, right? Reish Lakish was bothered Asham. Reish Lakish was... Reish Lakish was bothered by Asham. Right? That's what we said before. Everything else he has the pasuk, no problem. He's bothered in that pasuk. It's a svara because you can bring it up after the person dies. Like the case of the Ishaeledis is only by an Osher. So that's the question he says here. Osher Lazar Misa, Lame Rabbi Lazar to say, you know what Lazar said to him? You agree with me that an oiler, since it's shaykh to a woman after Misa, therefore you can bring it even though it's not Miratza. So the same thing, so you have no problem. It's Leil Shema, you bring it not Miratza. Your problem was Asham, right? Because an Asham you don't bring once the person dies. But what do you do with Asham? We said before, what do you do with Asham? You let it wander about. And then it turns into, you wait till it has a mum, you sell it with the money. What do you do with the money? You bring an Ayla. So even though the guy might have died, the owner of this Asham would have died, we still bring the carbon. No. So what do you tell me in Asham, that bother with an Asham, because an Asham, once the person dies, you don't bring it? Here we are, here, you do bring it as an Ayla. Rabbi Lazar said to him, if you agree with me regarding the Ayla, all the other kabbanas, that you can continue bring it even though it's not Maratza, then you should agree with me in Asham as well, because we find the same thing. Asham nami osila chamisa. Right? It turns into carbon Ayla that you put on the back. No, I'll tell you why the Shlakish didn't answer that. You know why? Because Asham, what's going to be your point? Your point is going to be not the Asham itself. Your point is going to be the money. After it has a mum, you sell it, 2 steps away. Right, it has a mum, you sell it, turn to money, and then with that money you buy another animal. And you're going to tell me that that's considered as if the animal is still being brought up. If that's your point, then Chatz is the same thing. What do you mean Chatz is the same thing? In the case where we had like a whole sugi in Psachim, whereby if you bring 2 carbon Pesach, one for the original carbon, and you want to make sure, so you have another carbon, let's say chatas, you set out 2 animals. One is going to be the carbon, the other one is the achrayas. In case something happens, a mum or something to this animal, I'm going to wait till Yom Tov, till I come. I have a second animal as a guarantee, as an insurance policy. This is my insurance policy. What happens? Nothing happened to the first animal. What do you do with the second animal? But you said it, you consecrate. So then you let it hang around until it gets a mum, and then you sell it, and with that money you put on his back, put dessert in his back. So if you're going to tell me that an asham, in principle, you can bring achamisha, chatz is the same thing. So you might say, lemai, asham lemai karev, lemaisa, right? You're talking about the leftover money, and then you put it on the mizbeach. No, chatz is not me. Mikriv karva maisa chatz. Maisa. You also bring the carbon maisa. So the same thing. So the Gemara, don't bring chatas. Chatas afagav the carbon maisa miyet rachmanahu. The Torah says by chatas, it says who? What do you mean who? That when do you bring the carbon chatas? Only if who? It's still a carbon chatas. What happens to the leftover money? An osham. Okay, has a mum, you sell it, and with the money, what do you buy? Oilers. it's no longer an asham. Mashenkein, sorry.
No longer chatted.
No. So by an asham, it's no longer. What do you do with the money? You bring as an oil asham, and by a chatas, it says clearly here that chatas who that the only time that you bring the chatas is if it's still a chatas. So therefore, if it's loy l'shmoy, if you did it loy l'shmoy, since we're not going to be able to bring it as a chatas, so you don't bring it all. No, for Gemara, it's the same who, it's the same cheshbon. So how come takanoshim is loy l'shmoy? You tell me you bring it on the mizbeach, even though it's not effective. The cheshbon says asham only if it's effective as an asham, you should bring it up. You're telling me by chatas only if it's effective as a chatas you bring it. No asham is a cheshbon. No, the word "hu" by asham we learn another din altogether. Don't do that. Where is it written in the Torah by asham that after you did the emurim, it says over there that it says the asham right here. It says v'hiktir oisa kainam mizbecha. In other words, you put in mizbecha, you roasted all the parts of it, and then asham hu. Now, we learned there's only 4 avodas that is ma'akiv by a carbon. Shchita, Kabbalah, accepting the blood, Halacha, walking Mizbech, and Zrika. Anything beyond that, if you didn't do it, you didn't do it. It's a mitzvah. You have to be maximum Mizbech. But if you didn't, the carbon is still Yetzi carbon. So where does it say the word who? By Haktorah. How can you tell me who is coming to tell you that if you don't have the Oshim effective, it's not an Oshim, you don't bring it up. You can. It's written where you talk about Ketaydas, where you bring them Mizbech, which even if you didn't bring Mizbech, the whole thing is kosher. Mashengi by chatas, it says by the shchita has to be over there who, and over there it's essential. And the only time you bring it up is if it's going to be a chatas. If it's not going to be a chatas, don't bring it. Mashengi by osham, the who is not talking about that. So why taka to say who? We'll see in a minute. But who forget about this whole drasha. What about you didn't do any roasting? You did the 4 avodas and the osham, and that's it. You ended with that. The person still yaitz. It's still kosher. So just a more digressing from here. Why taka to say who by Hashem? Okay, you tell me Hashem different chatas, but why taka to say who by Hashem? Look at Abuna Marav. Know what he said? Hashem shenitik l'riya. What happens is the Hashem, let's say, cannot be brought up. So you let it wander about. So it actually adds is the bezin has to tell you this is what. You go to bed. What should I do now? I brought another carbon instead of this one. The owner died. Whatever. What do you do now? So the bezin says, let it go wander about. So shenitik, it was pulled out. It was uprooted from its original consecration. And I said, so if the bezin was monatic, so that by doing the bezin doing that, they removed the asham status of this animal. And then if you shechted its stam, what happens? It's a kosher animal. No one's yaitz with it, but it's a kosher animal. But if you were not menatik it and you shechted it, you can't. It's possible. You can't do anything. Why is it possible? Because it's still an asham, and you didn't do it correct. You didn't do lishma. You didn't do it correctly. So it is. Asham shenitikli. If the bezin was menatik it, is v'shachtu stam and you shechted stam, kosher is kosher. Is vayshtu and nitik in. Only if it was menatik, you learn it to be better than a paskido loy. My time, but why? On my cross and passing, who it remains always an asham until a bezin comes and cancels it. Yosef Nachman Rav Sheshe Yosef Adam Masik Abayu. Rav Nachman Rav Sheshe was sitting, and about a master there. Yosef Kamri still continuing to talk about. Everybody's excited about this conversation. Rabbi Elazar said, what Rabbi say? We find by the case of the woman Yeledis that if she dies and she brought the chatas already, only the oil is outstanding, that you bring it up, the aim and what? And yet it's ineffective. He asked the question, interesting question. Who said it's ineffective? Who's bringing the carbon? The children, theirs. Since they're bringing the oil, maybe it's from the chap of them. Maybe it is effective. And meanwhile, and that's why they're bringing it. Because they yashin it. Let him say to them, you're bringing that ice what? Even though it's ineffective, you're bringing. Maybe it is effective. In fact, it should help the children. Maybe taka should be effective. Should be. At least he's not saying a fact. He's saying maybe taka should be effective, and no right from there that where it's ineffective, you still bring it. How can it be? This carbon was dedicated to be for a woman Yeledis. The son was a Yeled. It wasn't. The heir is the sons generally, so it's Bachayich. Yeledis, he yolda benem, yolda. How can this carbon? What do you tell him? He should have asked that the carbon is good for the kids. To do what? So you want to ask an interesting thing here. Maskal Rabasi. An oile is a mechapet any mitzvah asay you did. What happened? The woman did 5. She was a yeledes, but she happened to do 5 other avedas asay over asay. Can she have in mind with this one? You have to bring 5 different oilas. Not at all. You can bring one oila and have in mind all the assays that you did. Once you're bechuv to bring it anyway, because you gave birth, so you give her all other assays. So why can't it be that that the son, if the mother could have brought it for other assays, the son brings it for other assays? So the Shlaka should have said, "What's the right for the Yishayledes? Who said it's ineffective?" People generally commit avedas inside the Bajasa Yechte, and surely even I say somewhere along the line. So the carbon is effective. So the Gemara said, if she herself would have brought it, it's mechaper all of our avedas. The kim the chiyika kama say gabo mechaper, you should not be mechaper. Those mechaper. So the Gemara says, so what are you telling me? So your assumption is, you want to ask the Shlaka should have said that's mechaper. The only way you can understand that is if the child is actually koine the animal. In other words, he's not bringing it on behalf of his mother. He's bringing it because the animal now became his, and therefore you can be, because in order to be a kapara for yourself, you have to own the animal. So you're telling me that this carbon, the child is kaina, even though it's already a carbon, but the Yerusha, the child is kaina. So basically, the name of the kanulu, you want to say the kaina. I'm going to ask you a question. But Rabbi Yechon said, a guy dies and leaves a carbon mincha behind that he was going to bring the base of Mikdash and he didn't, so now his children have to bring it, but he has 2 sons. The din is, when Mason died, they bring it up. The ain boy shutfus. It's not pshat that there's a shutfus here, because when a carbon mincha, a normal carbon, 2, 3, 4 people can bring a carbon. Carbon Pesach, you have as many people as possible, except the carbon mincha, because that's the nefesh. Remember, it says all the different categories. When it comes to mincha, it says the nefesh. Rashi says because he's so poor that his nefesh comes out, but the nefesh single. When it comes to carbon mincha, you can't have shutfin. So how can the 2 sons bring the father's carbon mincha? Must be
It's the father's carbon.
It's the father's carbon, and they're not partners. They never inherited. So what are you asking me? A question that Shlaka should have said in the case of the mother, that the son is in fact it's affected because the son is being using it for his own avedas. How can he? It's not his carbon. The ain by shutfis. It says nefesh, and if they were nefesh rachman, if they were kind of, how can they both bring it? So now the Gemara asks back. So you're telling me that the child is not kind of the carbon. The very same Rabbi Yechon says something else, exactly the opposite. Well, like Kanyulu, he's not kind of. Rabbi Yechon, same Rabbi Yechon said he niach behema l'shnei banav, not a carbon mincha, but he left a behema for his sons. Umeis he died. Kereva, they can bring it, but the ein mamidimba. The din is we'll learn homosexual tomorrow, where you have an animal kodesh, you can swap it for another animal, and even though it's usher, they both become kodesh. But we learn now, it says in Hamer Yamer, that only if you cannot do it if you're partners. You cannot do it if you're partners. And here you're telling me that they can bring the carbon, but they cannot be maimed. Why can't they be maimed? Because they're partners. That means the 2 sons did yashin it. The same Rabbi Yechanan. By Mincha he said they didn't, and by animal he said they did. That's why it makes sense. They can be maimed. The Havalik is shutfin, but they're partners. The shutfin lamatzim, they can't. So they can't. So we digress completely from the whole discussion of Shlokis. Now we're trying to establish what happens to a carbon. The children kain or not. The shutfin lematzim. And the shutfin, we had in Sech Nazar a whole discussion if the son can use the father's carbon that he set aside. The shutfin lemotzim memirin, and shutfin cannot be maimed. Makes sense. Eli amnid like Kanye. If you're going to tell me like you charted it, and the children like Kanye the carbon, is a murin amelem. So why can't they be maimed as well? Says the Gemara. No. Maybe shiny hasam the Omakra. It says in Pasuk, im hamer yamir. Even no, I can tell you the children are not koina. The children are not koina, and therefore it's ineffective for the children. If the children are not koina, how can they bechlal be memia? So how come that can't be maimed? The Amakra says im hamer yamer l'rabbi says hayedish to tell you that the yedish could be maimed, but echad maimed so we have the drush. It says im hamer yamer double. Why say double? To tell you not only the original person but also the son. But but the son is not koina it. He just has the right to be maimed, but he's not koina, and therefore the Shlakish didn't ask the question. Oh, it is effective because the child was koina the mother's carbon and he's using it for himself. No, child is not koina the carbon. The carbon is for the mother, and like by the case of the mincha. But over here, when it comes to Tamura, when it comes to meeting, we have a special pasuk that tells you that the Yodesh can be maimed, but not if it's two Yoshim, only if it's one. Lashon Yochidim, Hamer Yamer. That's why. But it's because the child is not kained, so therefore Rabbi Elazar made a good point from the oil. You see clearly that we bring the oil, even though nobody was yaitzer with this carbon. She passed away already, and the children cannot use the carbon for themselves because it's not theirs. And that's why Rabbi Shlakish gave his other answer. He said, "I might have you. My only problem is Oshim." So you want to mask Rabbi Yaakov according to this, so you're making this whole cheshbon that says double lashon that the Yodesh can do it, but not in Shutvis or Me'ata, Gabi Maisa. By Maisa, the Chsiv says in the pasuk that that a person wants to be paid his own. If someone else is buying your Maisa, whatever it costs, $100, $100. But if the owner of the Tvua wants to be redeeming his Maisa so he can bring the money to Beis Hamikdash, he has to pay an extra 20%. He pays a chamish, a fifth. So there it says the pasuk, "Vim goel yigoelish." So it says it clearly, a double lashon. And according to you, the rabbis as hayodesh, right? And we learn from there that if the person dies and the son goes ahead and wants to swap it, he also has to pay that extra fifth. But it's lashon yachid. According to you, if there were two sons involved, then they don't pay the fifth. According to your cheshbon. So what are you comparing? What are you comparing? If the father would have had a partner in his animal, in the carbon, he couldn't do tumor either. Because a tumor, as we know, it says Yachid, only if you're the owner, sole owner, not if you're shutfus. By Maisa, the father himself had partners in his farm, and they want to go ahead and be paid it. He still has to pay the fifth. So therefore, if the father could have shutfin, so to the children. You can't be Mamai, something the father could have done. The window's open, that's all. So the Gemara, shiny mice, the Gabi, Avu and Nami Yisib Shut, the father could shoot us. Yeah, Ombale, Ravashi now said to Ravashi, Ebazei, Umino, let's learn from here itself. And so they were like this. Kanya. From Tumur itself, we can also learn whether a child is kain or not. If you tell me that the child is kain, my question still goes back. You said till now that the child's not kain at all. But why taka can it be maimer? If you tell me the child has some rights to it, therefore he can be maimer. How can be maimer? If you tell me the way you want to learn like mincha, the child's not kain at all, it's the mother's carbon, the father's carbon, then how can you make it mura? The Hamar Abavu Rabbi Yochanan Magdish, Rabbi Yochanan said, Hamagdish Moisiv Chaimish. If somebody makes an animal, if I make an animal kodesh, that you should be able to have a carbon. Who and then we have more way we want to redeem it. Who is the one that pays the extra money? The one that the carbon is meant for, or the person who was makdish it? He says no, it's the magdish. But the person that it meant for is the only one who could do the tamura. If I give truma for my crop on your tvua, your tevel, and you can't afford whatever, so I said, no, I'll do you a favor. I'll give the truma on your behalf, and then I don't own the truma, it belongs to a kohen, but I have teva sana. My daughter married a kohen, so I can say to this person, here, I'm giving here's $10, do me a favor, give me all your truma to my grandson, or to my son-in-law. You can do that. That's teva sana. Who has the teva sana? The one who gives it to her. So what does he familiar with me? That in order to be able to do tamura, you have to be involved. It has to be your carbon. It has to become your carbon. The one who's mischaper. So if you're telling me that the son can do tamura, doesn't that prove that he's the owner? Says the Gemara, no. And for the Gemara, mikiva loy mechapra, mikufia mechapra. That in order to own the animal, you have to be mamash a yodesh, and the yodesh not own the animal. But when it comes to kapora, so like this, kufya means floating above. When it comes to owning the animal, anything else, kavua, you have to be mamash an owner, and it's not mechaper. But mekufya, where it's floating, you have a little bit, enough, not enough to be a kapora, but enough to be able to do tomorrow. You're in a state, you're right in between. The child in between. You don't really own it, but I have some rights to it, enough to be able to do tumura. And that's why we learn from the pasuk that you could be tumura, but not enough to be a kapara. And therefore, what the point is, the son is not a yodesh, and therefore, if the mother dies and her oila is brought up as a carbon, is not alsa, is for the mother. And therefore, Rabbi Elazar said, you see, that even though it's ineffective, because the mother died already, it's ineffective. Nevertheless, we bring it. And that's why the Shlok said, I agree with you. My question is from Asham. Okay, so tomorrow night, 7:45, Mitzvah Shem, we'll do 2 blot, and Sunday morning we'll do 2 blot.